The shadow of the dead. Citizens, take heed. The undead scourge spreads among us. Every fallen soul must be consigned to the flames within 6 minutes of death, lest it rise again. Such grim decrees adorn the walls of the imperial cities whenever catastrophe looms. In the bleak, merciless age that is yet to come, even death grants no escape. A sinister affliction stalks mankind, one that twists despair itself into unending torment. It is known as the Curse of Unbelief. This horror does more than end life. It resurrects it in mockery. It transforms men, women, and children alike into staggering, flesh-hungry abominations in a galaxy where endless war and despair already reign. The Curse of Unbelief has grown into one of the most dreadful perils ever faced by humanity. Yet despite its terror, its tale remains veiled in secrecy, shrouded by fear, censorship, and forgotten history. This so-called zombie plague is far from a simple infection. It is a blight born from the chaotic energies of the warp, a sickness sustained by the sorrow and disbelief of humankind itself. In this chronicle, we will uncover the dark origins of this blasphemous disease, trace its horrifying spread, and revisit the infamous outbreaks that have scarred imperial history. We will also witness the desperate measures taken by the defenders of mankind, forced to battle an enemy composed of their own dead. Steel your mind, for you are about to enter one of the most chilling sagas in the history of the Imperium, a grim story of faith and despair, of life corrupted, death defied, and the terror that waits beyond the grave. Genesis of the warp-born blight. The genesis of this warp-born affliction is anything but natural. The curse of unbelief did not arise from the chaotic whims of evolution, nor from some failed laboratory experiment or irradiated wasteland mishap. Its beginnings are far darker, a deliberate act of malice. By all known accounts, this plague was not discovered but forged, a creation born of chaos itself. It is said to be the handiwork of the plague lord Nurgle, the ruinous god of pestilence and decay. Through infernal alchemy and forbidden sorcery, his servants engineered a pathogen that mocks every law of science and reason. This abomination is believed to be a fusion, a grotesque melding of a tangible virus and a warp-fueled curse, blending the physical with the metaphysical, the biological with the damned. The result is a blight that does not merely corrupt flesh. It infects the very soul. What makes the zombie plague truly horrifying is its merciless selectivity. It takes root only in those whose hearts have been hollowed by despair. Mortals, stripped of faith, hope, and will. In the Imperium, this lack of belief is not just a spiritual weakness. It is a fatal vulnerability. The broken, the hopeless, the fearful, they are the most susceptible. Hence the grim title, The Curse of Unbelief. It preys upon those who have already surrendered to darkness, those who no longer expect to see the light of another day. And in the harsh reality of imperial existence, where endless wars rage and oppression crushes entire worlds, such despair is tragically common. Nurgle could not have chosen a richer harvest. Human suffering is his nourishment, and misery his garden. No record reveals when or where this contagion first emerged. Some scholars suggest it may have been an accidental consequence of ancient warp experiments. Others whisper of a far more disturbing connection, one tied to the Golden Throne itself, the life-sustaining mechanism that keeps the Emperor of mankind bound between life and death. Inquisitors of the Thorian faction have long noted unsettling parallels between the warp-infused resurrection of plague victims and the warp-based preservation of the Emperor's own failing body. Could it be that in some forgotten age, heretical tech priests of the Dark Mechanicum sought to replicate the Emperor's divine miracle and instead gave birth to a monstrosity? It remains speculation, yet the very suggestion that this curse might be a twisted reflection of the Emperor's salvation is enough to unnerve even the most steadfast believer. What is certain is this: by the time the Imperium recognized the existence of the plague, it was already too late. The infection had spread quietly through the vulnerable edges of the galaxy, infiltrating worlds long before its presence was understood. As a warp-infused pathogen, it scoffs at traditional containment. It ignores the boundaries of time, matter, and logic. Anatomy of the damned, the body's descent. To comprehend the full terror of the curse of unbelief, one must witness what it inflicts upon its hosts. This is no mere illness of flesh. It is a disease of both body and soul. The physical deterioration caused by the plague mirrors a descent into madness itself, each stage more grotesque than the last. At first, the affliction conceals its cruelty. It begins softly, almost deceitfully, as though savoring the moment before despair takes hold. The newly infected experience little more than unease, nausea, dizziness, faint shadows flickering at the edges of sight. Their skin loses its warmth, taking on a pale green-gray tint. Small, oozing sores appear seemingly without reason. To a medic or loved one, these symptoms might resemble a passing fever or minor poisoning, nothing fatal. But even then, the victim has already become a walking source of infection. The hybrid pathogen, part virus, part curse, now flows through every vein and tear. A single droplet of blood, a shared breath. A trace of saliva is enough to doom another soul. The clock has begun its grim countdown, though few realize it. As the plague advances to its second stage, denial becomes impossible. The skin tightens, dries, and takes on the texture of withered parchment. Veins darken, crawling beneath the flesh like a spreading web. Hair falls away in ragged tufts as the scalp begins to rot. Sickly green scabs form in clusters, the body decaying before death has even arrived. By now, any hope of a cure, if one ever existed, is lost. The plague digs deeper, reaching into the mind. The infected begin to lose their grip on sanity. Personality erodes, replaced by waves of confusion and gnawing hunger. In rare lucid moments, victims may glimpse the horror, overtaking them, only for those moments to fade as an overwhelming craving consumes them. This is no natural hunger, but an unholy impulse, a desire for living flesh. Many become violent, lashing out at friends or family as the curse hijacks their instincts. Stage 3 leaves no illusion that the sufferer is human. They resemble walking corpses, gaunt faces sunken, eyes clouded to milky white or jaundiced yellow, lips drawn tight over cracked teeth. The skin turns chalk white or ashen gray, stretched taut across bone and sinew. Segments of flesh rot while the victim still moves. Pus-filled lesions burst, leaking foul ichor. The stench alone can unnerve hardened soldiers. Teeth loosen, gums recede, and bones protrude through the thinning skin. Much of the body is now necrotic, lifeless tissue animated by something far beyond biology, yet horrifically, the host remains conscious in some twisted form. Aware but powerless as the warp's corruption puppeteers their lingering life force. Then comes stage 4, the final transformation, the point of no return. At this stage, the host is dead by every medical definition. No pulse, no breath, no thought. The brain itself has turned to rot. Yet the corpse moves. The warp-infused parasite animates it like a puppet, driven by one single purpose, to hunt the living and spread the infection. Now fully a plague zombie, the creature deteriorates even as it moves. Each step tears its own flesh. Clawed hands leave strips of skin behind. Limbs snap and dangle uselessly. Thick black blood oozes through collapsed veins. Despite their disintegration, they persist, driven by hunger alone. These abominations gather instinctively, drawn by a shared psychic echo of starvation. They hunt anything alive, human, animal, or xeno, devouring victims and spreading the curse with every bite or scratch. A mere graze is a death sentence. Those who battle these horrors soon learn that ordinary combat tactics fail. Pain means nothing to them. Fear means nothing. They will not stop unless utterly destroyed. Blows to the chest or limbs are useless. Their organs have long ceased to function. Many a young guardsman has emptied an entire last rifle pack into a zombie's torso, only to be tackled by the thing that should be long dead. There is but one reliable method: destroy the head. Only by obliterating the brain or severing it entirely can the warp's grip be broken. Seasoned soldiers take no chances. Decapitation, cremation, and total annihilation are standard practice. The old Imperial warning to burn all. Corpses within 6 minutes is not superstition, it is survival. Delay for even moments, and the fallen might rise against you. On worlds touched by this curse, flamers and chains words become sacred tools of mercy. If all this seems like the tale of a lurid pulp horror, know this: it is grim reality in the Imperium. The ancient myths of Terran zombies pale beside Nurgle's abominable creation. These plague-ridden dead are relentless. Experience has taught that only complete destruction ends them. Sever limbs, shatter bones, burn the remains, anything less, and they crawl onward, driven by that insatiable will. Reports abound of soldiers cutting one apart, only to see its severed hands twitch or its jaw still gnash. As one weary space marine once muttered after battle, "Throne, will they ever stop? I've slain 100, maybe more." To which his brother replied grimly, "Perhaps you kept killing the same one. Unless you crush the head, it rises again." A chilling truth: if you do not finish a plague zombie, it will rise forever. There is no mercy in it, no peace, only endless torment, early encounters, dark whispers. Although the curse of unbelief truly rose to prominence in the modern era, there are whisperings of its influence, stretching far back in Imperial history. Indeed, the first documented instances of what we now recognize as plague zombies date all the way back to the end of the Great Crusade, just before the galaxy was engulfed in the Horus heresy. These early accounts are fragmentary, half-forgotten logs, personal journals, mythologized retellings, but they paint a chilling picture. One famous incident took place on the moon of Davin, a feral world in the Davin system. It was here that War Master Horus, the Emperor's favorite son, would later be wounded and corrupted. But in the lead-up to that tragedy, an entire battle was fought in the swamps of Davin Moon. The Luna Wolves Space Marine Legion, later known as the Sons of Horus, assaulted this moon, expecting to put down a simple rebellion by a primitive tribe and their priests. Instead, they encountered something out of a nightmare. As they advanced through the mud and fog, the arties found themselves beset by shambling figures that did not fall when shot. Warriors reported enemies that kept fighting despite suffering mortal wounds. Corpses littering the battlefield suddenly stirred and grabbed at the living. The Lunar Wolves realized they were up against a plague of undead. In a harrowing close-quarters struggle, they burned and hacked their way through hordes of reanimated corpses. It was during this fight that the exchange about destroying the head was born, as even transhuman space marines had to adapt on the fly to a foe that simply refused to die. Many Imperial historians now believe that the Davin's moon incident was a brush with the very curse of unbelief. Chaos testing this foul weapon on the Emperor's own warriors at the dawn of the heresy. If true, it means the galaxy's first encounter with the zombie plague coincided with the first great betrayal, as if an omen of the dark days to come. It wouldn't be the last. In the millennia after, references to restless corpses and plague zombies crop up sporadically, usually in the context of chaos cult activity or unexplained contagions on far-flung worlds. During the long centuries of the Imperium's history, especially in times of widespread turmoil, there were always rumors. An isolated colony where an entire settlement died and yet walked again, or a void ship found adrift with its crew, mangled and half-eaten. The culprits assumed to be the crew themselves risen from the grave. These accounts were often dismissed as superstition or Xenos influence. Only in hindsight, as knowledge of the Curse of Unbelief became codified, did the Inquisition realize that many of these tales were in fact early outbreaks of the zombie plague. But such recognition came far too late for the victims. The plague in the 41st millennium. The plague. It was in the late 41st millennium that the Curse of Unbelief truly exploded into the awareness of the wider Imperium. By this era, humanity was beset by endless war and chaos. Incursions. The Chaos Gods, sensing weakness, were unleashing all manner of horrors. Nurgle in particular seemed eager to let his zombie plague off the leash. What follows are some of the most notorious outbreaks and uses of the plague in relatively recent history. Grim case studies in how devastating this curse can be. Hydra Minoris. Hydra Minoris, a world in quarantine. In the year 757 M41, the prosperous hive world of Hydra Minoris became the stage for a nightmare. Hydra Minoris was a heavily populated planet, home to tens of billions and an important industrial center in its sector. Life there was harsh but stable under Imperial rule. That changed when Typhus, the herald of Nurgle, one of Nurgle's most feared champions, chose Hydra Minoris as a target for his evil craft. Typhus, a Chaos Space Marine Lord of the Death Guard, carried within him Nurgle's worst plagues, and he delighted in spreading them from world to world, under the cover of a chaotic invasion, or perhaps a stealth infiltration. Accounts vary. Typhus and his plague marines penetrated the planet's defenses and reached the heart of Hydra Minoris's primary hive city. Once there, they unleashed the Curse of Unbelief in its purest form. Some say Typhus himself broke open an ancient sealed casket gifted by Nurgle, releasing a cloud of contagion into the hive's atmosphere. Others claim a cult within the hive had already been brewing the disease, and Typhus's arrival was the final catalyst that ensured the contagion would run wild. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Within days, a mysterious sickness gripped the population of the hive. Medicare reports from the first week note patients with unusual symptoms, gray skin, unresponsive to treatment, sudden, violent behavior. Panic spread faster than the plague at first. People feared it was a new strain of the weeping or some other known hive illness. The truth became evident soon enough when the recently deceased refused to stay dead. Entire habitation blocks went silent, only to erupt in frenzy as hordes of undead workers and hive-gangers swarmed through, feasting on their screaming neighbors. Enforcers who went in to restore order found themselves overwhelmed by masses of people that gunfire alone couldn't stop. One by one, the lights in the underhive sections flickered out. Hydra Minoris was dying. The Imperium's response, while swift, was utterly merciless. Recognizing that a warped plague was on the loose, and with great fear that it could be borne off-world by ships or refugees, the Segmentum authorities made a grim decision. Quarantine. The Imperial Navy enforced a blockade around Hydra Minoris. All traffic to and from the planet was interdicted under threat of immediate destruction. No one was allowed to leave the world, not even uninfected citizens. In effect, Hydra, Minoris and its population were sealed off to die. To the bureaucrats and admirals, it was cold logic. Better to lose one world than risk the plague, spreading to a dozen more. But the human cost was almost unthinkable. Over 23 billion souls were trapped on the surface alongside an ever-growing tide of hungry and mindless undead. Those uninfected survivors, tens of billions of terrified men, women, and children were left with an impossible fight for survival or a slow inevitable doom. Some managed to hide out in sealed bunkers or upper spire holdouts for a time, watching their world burn and decay beneath them. There are fragmented Vox transmissions from Hydra Minoris during those days that still circulate as cautionary tales, pleas for rescue, prayers to the Emperor for deliverance, screams as secure zones fell to internal outbreaks. One infamous recording features an Imperial governor's final message. May the Emperor forgive us for what we have done. We tried to contain it. They're everywhere. The dead, Emperor, save my soul. The message ends with wet, tearing sounds and silence. In time, Hydra Minoris went completely dark. Whether any pockets of life remained deep in hidden refuse is unknown, but for official purposes the world was written off. To this day, the quarantine of Hydra Minoris stands as one of the most draconian, if tragically effective, measures taken against the curse of unbelief. It demonstrates the cruel calculus the Imperium is prepared to use. An entire planet sacrificed. Billions killed either by the plague or by starvation and isolation, all to prevent a greater spread. The husk of Hydra Minoris still exists, and theoretically, if the curse burned itself out, once no more living hosts remained, the planet could be recolonized. But few have the stomach to ever go back. It's likely a haunted, poisoned globe of decaying cities and wandering dead left to rot in the void. A permanent warning to the rest of humanity. The plague in the Underhive. Plague in the Underhive. The curse of unbelief isn't only found on battlefields or in massive planetary outbreaks. It also furs in the forgotten, neglected corners of human civilization, places rife with misery where it can quietly take root. Perhaps the most notorious example is the world of Necroanda, particularly the rancid depths of its hive cities. Necroanda is a planet entirely covered in megacities with billions living in tiered hives that reach both miles into the sky and miles into the ground. The rich and powerful live at the spire tops, while the bottom of the hives, the Underhive, is a lawless, lightless realm of gangs, mutants, waste, and despair. It's said that in some Underhive zones, people live their whole lives knee-deep in toxic sludge and never see the sun. Hope is a scarce commodity there. Faith often replaced by brutality or apathy. In other words, prime feeding grounds for the curse of unbelief. It's unclear exactly when the zombie plague first appeared in Necroandanda's Underhives, but over the years it has repeatedly flared up. Hive quakes or structural collapses occasionally unear ancient tunnels filled with ghastly surprises. Pockets of plague zombies sealed away from some forgotten past, now stumbling into new hunting grounds. Other times an infected hive gangganger from off-world might bring the curse in unknowingly, sparking an Underhive epidemic. The local conditions then do the rest. In the crowded, unsanitary depths, the infection spreads like wildfire. Whole domes and settlements in the Underhive can fall silent, only to be overrun by moaning hordes days later. One figure looms large in the legend of Necroandan plague outbreaks. Carlo, Valwis, also known as the zombie master of Necrowanda. Carlo Valwis was once a wretched hive scummer, a man of little consequence except that he was born a latent psyker with an unfortunate knack for hearing the whispers of the warp. Driven half mad by nightmares, Carlo ended up wandering the absolute lowest levels of the hive, the toxic sump areas where few dare tread. It was here that fate, or the Plague Lord's hand, intervened. Carlo was attacked by a pack of plague zombies prowling those lightless tunnels. Cornered and savaged, he was bitten multiple times, a death sentence by any measure. The zombies began feasting on his flesh, and Carlo felt the infection flooding his veins. He should have died and risen as just another mindless ghoul, but Carlo's innate psychic power reacted in that desperate moment, teetering between life and undeath. He touched the simple, hunger-driven minds of the zombie pack, and miraculously bent them to his will. For the first time, it seems, a human being wrested control of Nurgal's cursed children. Carlo Valwis did not succumb to the plague in the normal way. He became a living half-dead anomaly, infected but not a mindless zombie, sustained by siphoning the life force of the zombies he controlled. In mastering the undead, he halted his own final death at the brink. Over time, he found that the plague's curse had twisted his psychic abilities. He could telepathically communicate with plague zombies, hurting them like animals. He could dim their eternal hunger or sharpen it to a frenzy. And to sustain himself, Carlo learned to drain the life energy of the living as a vampire might, because regular food or drink no longer nourished his corrupted form. Empowered and embittered, Carlo Valwis rose from being a victim to a would-be underhive warlord. He gathered packs of plague zombies under his control and terrorized settlements, extorting supplies and loyalty from underhive gangs in exchange for directing the zombies elsewhere. Over years, his legend grew. Mothers would frighten naughty children with tales that Carlo and his zombies would come for them if they didn't behave. Eventually, Carlo's depredations drew the attention of the powerful, a fanatical cult known as the Redemption, noted for their red robes and zealous hatred of witches and mutants, declared a crusade to purge the Necroandan nightmares. The ensuing conflict was straight out of a horror Hollywood. Redemptionist fire teams, armed with flamers and fury, delving into the dark, fighting hordes of undead. In pitch battle deep below Hive City foundations, Carlo's Zombie Legion clashed with the Redemptionists in a battle at a precipice known only as the Abyss. A chasm so deep no one sees the bottom. Waves of zombies threw themselves at the flame-spewing redeemers. The Siege of Rex. The Siege of Rex, when the dead won't die. On a far larger scale, the zombie plague has been employed as a weapon of war by Chaos forces. A notorious example came during the long and bloody Siege of Rex. Frax was an imperial armory world that fell into corruption and rebellion, sparking a grinding siege between the forces of the Imperium and traitor renegades that lasted 17 terrible years. As the war on Vrax dragged on, the battlefields became literally piled with corpses. Trenches crisscrossed the planet's surface, and the no-man's lands were filled with the dead of both sides. It was a perfect canvas for Nurgle's art. Enter the Apostles of Contagion, a Chaos Space Marine warband splintered from the Death Guard Legion. Led by a malefic sorcerer known as Necrosius, the Apostles of Contagion were devoted to Nurgle and experts in spreading his foul plagues. They saw in Vra an opportunity to break the stalemate and gift Nurgle a massive harvest of souls. Secretly under cover of night and toxic fog, the Apostles infiltrated the battle zones and introduced the zombie plague into the corpse-choked mud. Some accounts suggest they performed dark rituals in mass graves or released contaminated phage bombs into areas thick with unburied bodies. The effect was as sudden as it was devastating. The dead on Verex began to rise. Imagine the plight of the Imperial Guard soldiers on the line, exhausted, nerves frayed, watching the enemy trenches, when suddenly a low moan rises from all around, from shell craters and Carroll, pits from beneath piles of their fallen comrades. Shapes begin to stir. Guardsmen who died days ago of artillery fire or disease claw their way out of the muck. Eyes rolled back, endrails dangling, and they shamble toward the living with hungry intent. One can only fathom the mix of horror and heartache. To see the face of a friend, a brother in arms you mourned, now coming at you, with empty eyes and blood-stained teeth. The apostles of contagion had turned Vra into a nightmare front, where every fallen soldier potentially became a new enemy. The Imperial lines buckled under the onslaught. How do you fight an enemy that only swells in number the more casualties you take? Panic spread, and with panic despair, ironically fueling the plague further as more soldiers lost hope and thus became susceptible. It was only through the timely intervention of the Inquisition's experts and the sheer, bloody-minded resolve of certain veteran units that Vrax didn't completely collapse. That day, flamethrower teams scoured the trenches, burning anything that moved among the piles of dead. The Imperial forces learned to preempt the curse by gathering and incinerating corpses wherever possible. A grim task. In the middle of battle, to be sure, snipers were instructed to aim for the head on any shambling figure, friend or foe. Still, the damage was done. The apostles of contagion had significantly weakened the defenders and sown terror in their ranks. The Black Crusade and the Galaxy Aflame. Even the calamity of Rex was but a prelude to a far greater plague outbreak that would shake the galaxy. The events surrounding the 13th Black Crusade and the opening of the Great Rift. The 13th Black Crusade was the most massive chaos invasion of the Imperium since the heresy launched by Abdon the Despoiler in late M41. As the forces of chaos surged out of the Eye of Terror, they attacked Cadia and dozens of surrounding systems in the Segmentum Obscurus. It was the perfect storm for the Curse of Unbelief to thrive. Indeed, before the Black Crusade even fully commenced, reports of the zombie plague began to multiply on worlds near the Eye of Terror. It was as if Nurgle decided to soften the battlefield in advance, sowing terror and confusion. At the forefront of this sickly tide was once again Typhus, herald of Nurgle, while Abdon led the main armies in head-on assaults. Typhus spearheaded what were called the Plague Fleets, flotillas of pestilence that slipped into systems ahead of the Black Crusade's vanguard. Typhus brought the Curse of Unbelief with him like an ever-ready tool. One by one, vulnerable planets found themselves host to sudden outbreaks. Often it began with small incidents. An asteroid miner on some moon coughs up black blood and collapses, or a pilgrim ship arriving at a shrine world carries an unwitting, infected passenger. These seeds would quickly bloom into full-blown pandemics. At the worst possible time, just when the Imperial Navy or Astra Militarum forces mobilized to face a chaos invasion, their rear lines and civilian populations would explode in internal crisis as the zombie plague reared up. It was the ultimate act of biological warfare. Unleash the enemy's own dead against them to distract and destabilize right as the real invasion hits. Cadia, itself the stalwart fortress world guarding the Eye, was not spared the scare. Though Cadia's fall came primarily through brute force and overwhelming numbers, propaganda posters like the one quoted in our introduction appeared all over Cadia cities during the war. Stark reminders to the citizens and troops to burn their dead immediately. Clearly the plague was present enough to warrant such measures, or at least the threat was taken seriously. The disciplined Cadence managed to avoid a large-scale zombie infestation. They had enough on their hands with the planet literally breaking apart. But elsewhere the story was different. Numerous Imperial worlds fell to chaos during the 13th Black Crusade, and in many, the Curse of Unbelief took hold either during or shortly after the main battles. An example is the fate of a holy world called Annunciation, a planet famed for its grand cathedrals and reliquaries of imperial saints. Typhus chose this pious world for a particularly cruel demonstration. After the planet's defenders were defeated, Typhus enacted a ritual to consecrate the ground to Nurgle. The shrine basilicas had become carol houses. The grand altar of the planet's primary cathedral was found, drenched in gore with hundreds of plague zombies kneeling in mock prayer, as if parodies of the faithful they once were. Typhus had literally desecrated the holy world by turning its own piety-poisoned citizens into an undead army. It said, the cleansing team sent by the Inquisition had to use flamers until the stone walls cracked from heat, and still they remained unsure if any hidden catacombs of undead were left behind. Another unsettling case occurred on the frontier planet of Gahur, where a minor demonic incursion erupted seemingly at random. Alongside the gibbering lesser demons that spilled into reality, there came mass-shambling ranks of plague zombies. The warp breach apparently let both demons and the zombie curse through simultaneously. The unlucky PDF troops found themselves fighting not just nightmare creatures from the Imperium, but also the reanimated bodies of their own towns. Folk surviving records indicate Gahur's defenders were overrun within days, the entire planet falling dark as a carnival of plague and demons danced through its habus. Only much later, when the warp storms receded, did the Imperium attempt to investigate. By then, nothing remained but ghost cities and piles of bones picked clean. These incidents underscore how the Curse of Unbelief became an interstellar menace. And then, as if matters weren't dire enough, reality itself cracked. In the wake of Cadia's destruction, the Imperium was split by a colossal warp storm, the Great Rift, which tore across the galaxy. With the Great Rift's appearance, the influence of chaos dramatically expanded everywhere. No corner of the Imperium was truly safe from warp-spawned phenomena, and that included the spread of the zombie plague. It was as if a floodgate opened, where once the zombie plague was largely confined to regions near the Eye of Terror or under active assault by Nurgle's forces. Now it began popping up across all sectors. Worlds that had never heard of such a thing suddenly found themselves fighting the risen dead. Even more concerning, the plague itself mutated. The raw chaos energy permeating the galaxy led to new strains and stranger infection vectors. In some reports, people have succumbed to the curse without any direct physical contact. No bite or scratch seemingly, infected by intense fear or nightmares given form. Tales spread of Vox broadcasts carrying a psychic contagion that induced despair in listeners, leaving entire hab blocks as easy prey for the curse. Fighting the curse. Adapt in various ways. Officially, knowledge of the Curse of Unbelief is kept somewhat restricted. The average planetary citizen is not going to learn about it until it's on their doorstep. Hearing too much about it might spread panic, which ironically only makes people more vulnerable to it. However, in the higher echelons of Imperial Command and the Inquisition, the threat is well known and taken very seriously. Over the centuries, specialized protocols and organizations have been developed to combat this plague. One of the foremost of these is the Ordo Sepularum, a minor branch of the Holy Inquisition. While the Inquisition's main bodies The Ordo Hereticus Xenos and Melos deal with witches, aliens, and demons respectively. The Ordo Sepulorum was founded specifically to address the growing problem of chaos or undead outbreaks. These inquisitors and their acolytes are sometimes grimly nicknamed the corpse hunters or plague doctors by their peers. They are tasked with investigating any sign of the curse, containing outbreaks and studying the plague to glean any advantages. It's not a prestigious assignment. Ordo Sepultarum agents find themselves trudging through plague-infested war zones, performing autopsies on rotted cadavers, or hunting down alone infected patient zero in some backwater town before an epidemic can bloom. But their work has saved countless lives and undeaths. For instance, after the Hydra minor disaster, Ordoilum agents made sure that any ship or life pod that might have left the planet was traced and intercepted. This prevented secondary outbreaks on nearby worlds. In one case, an inquisitor of this order deliberately allowed himself to be bitten and then secluded himself under observation, sacrificing his own life to provide live data on the infection's progression and thus confirming the timeline of stages and when a victim becomes contagious. His heroic self-experiment ended, of course, with his acolytes incinerating him the moment he turned. Another tactic in fighting the plague is surprisingly simple: maintaining morale and faith. Recall that the curse of unbelief cannot easily infect those who possess strong hope or devotion. It preys on the spiritually defeated. Imperial authorities have used this fact as a tool. During times of plague threat, ecclesiarchy priests and commissars alike work double time to inspire, cajole, or terrorize the populace into keeping the faith and resisting despair. Rousing sermons, public rallies of defiance, draconian punishment for defeat talk, all are employed to shore up the mental defenses of the people. It's a brutal sort of psychological vaccination. Instill faith through any means necessary, because to lose hope is literally to invite damnation. There is perhaps dark humor in this. The Imperium has always demanded unyielding faith from its subjects, and here is a disease that makes that demand a matter of life and death. As a result, one of the standard advisories in any suspected plague situation, quietly included in administratum memos, is increase the level of Imperial Creed propaganda immediately. An inspired citizen might still die in many horrible ways, but at least they won't rise again to eat their neighbors. On the more practical front, Imperial military forces have standing orders on how to deal with potential plague zombie scenarios. Medics carry fast-acting toxins to euthanize any soldier showing latest stage symptoms. Prometheum stockpiles for flamers are kept in reserve whenever Nurgle's forces are known to be in theater. Sniper units are briefed to target any unusual movement among corpses. Perhaps most importantly, commanders are authorized to enforce severe quarantine measures. This can mean sealing off sections of a hive city, even ordering extermination bombardment on infected zones if that's what it takes. It's harsh but necessary. If a single escape shuttle from Hydra Minoris had slipped past the blockade, for instance, the plague might have spread to a dozen other worlds and killed trillions. No one understands better than the Imperium's leaders that when dealing with this curse, you cannot hesitate to make sacrificial calls. In space, the Navy has its own protocols. Any ship known or suspected to be infected is immediately isolated. Boarding teams sent to sanitize such ships are effectively on suicide missions. Armed with flamers and void-hardened hazmat suits, they'll sweep through flickering corridors, torching reanimated crew members and venting compartments into the vacuum. If the situation looks too far gone, standard procedure is to scuttle or destroy the entire vessel rather than risk it ever docking somewhere and unleashing death. Many a proud imperial cruiser or merchant freighter has been deliberately consigned to the void along with all hands due to a single contaminated crewman showing the telltale signs of graying skin and bite marks. Better to lose one ship now than an entire planet later. Amidst these grim defensive measures, the Ordo Sepilorum and allied tech priests have also pursued an intriguing line of research. Could the Curse of Unbelief hold the key to some greater good? This is a heretical thought to many, but some inquisitors, particularly those of the Thorian philosophy, argue that understanding how the plague reanimates the dead might unlock secrets to preserving life through the warp. The rationale is admittedly fascinating. The Emperor of Mankind himself is a dying corpse kept alive by a continuous miracle of techno-sorcery on the Golden Throne. The zombie plague, in a perverse way, also preserves a semblance of life in dead tissue via warp power. If one could isolate what makes the plague tick without its destructive side, perhaps one could create a so-called faith virus, a sanctioned holy version that could sustain a loyal servant's life beyond death, or even revitalize the Emperor. It sounds like science fiction, but in the halls of certain inquisitorial conclaves, such radical ideas have been seriously debated. Results so far: catastrophic failure. Every attempt to tinker with the plague's essence, to bend it toward a beneficial end, has resulted in ghastly mutations or new dangers. One Margot's biologist created a prototype serum intended to grant an imperial hero the regenerative undeath of a zombie without the loss of mind. The test subject instead sprouted tentacles from his face and had to be euthanized when he started reciting Nurgate scripture in reverse. Another experiment tried using fragments of saintly relics and a sample of the plague, hoping the holy energy would neutralize the chaos. The result was a strain of infection that actually animated the skeletal remains of the long-dead saint, a literal skeleton warrior that attacked everyone in the lab before crumbling. After incidents like these, most agree that trying to domesticate or sanctify the curse of unbelief is folly. It is anathema to life and hope by its very nature, and any attempt to use it for good is like trying to train a demon host to hug children. It's just not going to work out. The Thorans, however, quietly continue their research, convinced that in the plague lies some fragment of the Emperor's own immortality. The debate, no doubt, will rage on as humanity grows ever more desperate for a way to keep the god Emperor's light from fading.